we have begun a very aggressive and detailed effort to address the problem of sexual assault on college campuses in our country, together with other members of the Senate, and this is a good, broad, bipartisan coalition that is going to work on legislation. I thought it was very important that we take an in-depth survey of colleges in this country to find out what is the nature of this problem. And today we are announcing the results of this survey. There are schools that are working hard every day to protect their students, but this survey shows that there are way too many schools that are failing, and just about every single institution in the country has room for improvement. Let me start with some of the key numbers from the survey that I think are very telling about how serious this problem is. As to a Title IX coordinator, you cannot meet your basic responsibilities under the law if you do not have a Title IX coordinator. That is like the bare necessity. Unfortunately, many times a title coordinator is somebody who's been handed a clipboard with no training, but nonetheless, it is revealing that more than 10% of the institutions we surveyed do not even have a Title IX coordinator. They fail in this very basic first requirement in this area of the law. As to adjudication, and so everyone understands one of the reasons this problem is so thorny is because, as in military sexual assault, there's potentially two systems. There is the Title X courts, Article 10 courts, the civil criminal courts that can deal with this problem, and in the military there is a military justice system. So there you have two systems, both that can result in prosecuting the perpetrator. In this environment, we have two systems, but one is an administrative adjudication that the university is required to undergo if, in fact, they determine in their investigation that one is warranted. So every time there's a report of sexual assault on campus, regardless of what happens in the criminal justice system, that college or university is required to do an investigation, and if the facts warrant it, hold an administrative adjudication that can result in punishment to the perpetrator. So as we looked at these adjudication processes on college campuses, there were some numbers that really jumped out at me and I think most Americans would find unacceptable. 33% of the schools in this country are failing to provide basic training to those people who are adjudicating these claims. And training is very important in this area because of the myths that surround particularly acquaintance rape. That somehow if you know the person who assaults you, it's not rape. That somehow if the victim had been engaging in any bad choices in terms of their behavior, that somehow it is not rape. Training in this area is essential, especially for people who are going to be making decisions as to whether or not someone is going to be held accountable for their actions. And one that really gets me is that in 22% of these schools, the athletic department has been given the authority to oversee the actual accusations against student athletes. And I don't need to explain why that is a big problem. You cannot expect an athletic department who is in charge of giving a scholarship or depending on the athletic prowess of a young man or woman that they will be fair, or at least have the appearance of being fair, which is the first basic necessity. I think most victims would assume if the athletic department is in charge of an adjudication process over my assailant who is a star athlete, I think it would scare just about any victim into the shadows and reinforce a sense that so many of these victims have, so many of these survivors have, that what is the point of coming forward? Nothing's going to happen, the system is rigged, and no one will take me seriously, and therefore, what is the point of even reporting this? Coordination with law enforcement, and this is obviously a sore point with me as a former prosecutor who handled hundreds of these types of cases. I think it's really important that this survey be a wake-up call to colleges and universities that they must reach out to local law enforcement and they must train the law enforcement entities that are working on their campuses. Law enforcement officials at 30% of the institutions that in the United States, of the higher education institutions in the United States, receive no training on how to respond to reports of sexual violence. So your chances are 1 in 3. If you have been assaulted on a college campus and you go to campus law enforcement, that your chances are 1 out of 3 that the person you talk to has never had the basic training on how to conduct that interview in a way that is fair, thorough, and it frankly understands the nature of the crime and the type of forensic interview that must occur. 73% of the institutions have no protocols in place on how these higher education institutions should work together with law enforcement. Perhaps potentially the most disturbing part of this survey that we have now learned is federal law requires that every institution that knows or that reasonably should have known about sexual violence to conduct an investigation. That is black letter law in this country right now. 41% of the schools that were surveyed had not conducted a single investigation in the last 5 years. Now, when we know the prevalence of this problem, it is obviously a serious indictment that you have that many schools that have not investigated a single case in 5 years. More than 21% of the nation's largest private institutions conducted fewer investigations than the incidents they reported. Let me make sure you understand that. They are reporting, for example, hypothetically, a large private institution is reporting under the Clary Act that perhaps they had 20 reports of sexual assault in a given calendar year. And yet they acknowledge they've only done 10 investigations. Well, on its face, they are violating the law because they are required to investigate every report. So if they are acknowledging they're not reporting as many incidents, they're not investigating as many incidents as they're reporting, obviously we've got serious work to do. These results, along with the results of our roundtables and dozens and dozens of discussions with experts, stakeholders, university administrators, survivors, will be the basis of legislation that will be drafted and in a bipartisan way, and hopefully we will file that legislation at or near the time that most college students are returning to campuses this fall.